I need to brush my hair. Why did I decide to film at 6 p.m? Now, you're probably looking at this and being like, what the heck, Jasmine? This is a new setup. You've been missing for literally months. You have not posted a single video. And, yeah. I tried. Genuinely, I tried. So I've filmed this video twice before, months ago. Never got posted. It was halfway through editing, but basically I've been in America. I was teaching science at summer camp for 3 months. I've just got back, and as you can see, I am not where I normally am, and that's because I've just moved into uni. So I'm hoping to get back into filming YouTube videos, which is what I'm trying to do now, but I am incredibly rusty at it, as it seems. Now, I don't think it comes as a surprise to literally anyone that I was a Greek mythology girly. I mean, I think I'm pretty much the archetype at this point. Actually, it was to the point that when I was 12, I started taking classics lessons outside of school because I was just a little bit obsessed. So this is the deep dives episode that I feel like I am the most qualified to talk about. And for that reason, it is going to be a meaty one because I'm going to try, emphasis on try, and attempt to cover pretty much all of Greek mythology in one video, and it's going to be difficult. Just a quick disclaimer, some things mentioned in this video will be probably a gross oversimplification of certain things. That is because I'm trying to pack so much into a video without this being about 10 hours long or me veering into a random tangent. So I am aware that some things are a simplification. Just bear with me. So I feel like when you're doing a deep dive as big as this one, you naturally have to start at the beginning, but before I cover the creation myth in Greek mythology, I feel like I need to explain the levels of primordial deities, because when we picture Greek mythology, you're most likely going to picture the Greek gods, so like Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, but not everyone with power in Greek mythology is a god, and there's very much a hierarchy to it. Bear with me, I will try to explain it now. First of all, there are the Titans, which chronologically came first in the timeline of Greek mythology, if you will. They tend to represent more natural concepts, so like we've got Gaia, who is represents the earth, we've got Ouranos, which is the sky, the ocean, etc. And children of the Titans were gods. Not all of them though. There's exceptions to every single thing I'm going to say in this video, by the way. It's going to get confusing. I'm going to try and explain it the best I can. Gods are children of Titans. However, gods are also split up in 2 categories. There's the Olympians and then there's minor gods. Minor gods tend to be children of Olympians, but Olympians can also be children of other Olympians. I'll get to that in a minute. And then on the bottom of this kind of primordial food chain, if you will, are demigods, which are children of a god and a human, which happens way more than you may picture, as you will quickly learn in this video. Demigods tend to have a bit more power than the rest of the humans, but they are still very much mortal. So in summary, the Greek mythology family tree is one big mess and everyone's related, and yes, this is gonna get interesting very quickly. So in the Greek creation myth, we start off with Chaos, who's basically just a big representation of the void. Think just pre-Big Bang, if you will. From Chaos emerges 3 titans: Gaia, the earth, Tartarus, who represents the underworld, and Eros, which represents love. Although Eros is debated, he has his own section, I will get to him later, he is interesting. From Gaia also emerged Ouranos, who represents the sky. So Ouranos and Gaia have a lot of children together. Some of them are other titans, most notably Kronos, we'll get to him in a second, and some of them are not. Some of them are Cyclops, who you will see pop up a lot in modern media, and also these creatures called the 100-headed ones. They're not really that relevant to a lot of these stories, however. However, Ouranos this is a theme you'll see repeating a lot in Greek mythology. Orson gets quite self-conscious about himself and starts getting really paranoid that his children are going to overthrow them one day. So he locks all the Cyclops and the 100-headed ones in Tartarus, the place, not the deity. It's the same with Hades. Hades is a place and Hades is a god. It gets confusing. Do you see why I struggle to make this video? Basically, Ouranos locked away half of his children except for the other Titan children for some reason, which really pisses off Gaia for quite obvious reasons, who employs her son Kronos to overthrow him and castrate him, which somehow leads to the creation of the Furies, the Giants, the Nymphs, and possibly Aphrodite. Again, I will get to her in a second. Things then became at peace for a while. Kronos became the ruler of the cosmos and had a few children with his wife, Rhea. However, he feared history may repeat itself and was so worried about his children overthrowing him that he ate them, which naturally pissed off his wife again. So Rhea swapped out her youngest child, Zeus, who you will hear a lot of, with a rock, who later came back and forced Kronos to spit out his siblings, because apparently they were still alive, so he could take over the order of things and wreak havoc among the women of Greece. This is the beginning of the rise of the Olympians, which is like the era in Greek mythology that you will hear the most about. Zeus becomes king of Olympus, and his brothers Poseidon and Hades control the oceans and the underworld respectively. He marries his sister Hera, which happens a lot, we're not going to get into it, it's like a Game of Thrones type situation. And Hestia and Demeter also become Olympians, as well as Aphrodite, after getting born from sea foam and or castrated sky. Well, again, we'll get to that later. Zeus then goes on to have a series of children with mostly Hera, although that doesn't last for long, including Ares, Hermes, and Hephaestus. Try and say that 3 times fast. Then he also has a child somewhat asexually in the form of Athena, being literally born from a headache he had one day. He then has twins with the goddess Leto. That's definitely pronounced wrong, I am very sorry. Artemis and Apollo, who personally my favourite gods, but not the point. This also greatly angers Hera, and she basically decides to wage war against any child born of Zeus that is not her own. This will cause implications later. But to be fair to Hera, she is literally the goddess of marriage and infertility, so he is literally throwing that in her face. Zeus also has a child with Semele called Dionysus, mostly known to be the god of wine and or insanity, but it is a bit more than that. Now, the count of how many Olympians there are is somewhat controversial. Supposedly, there are 12 Olympians. However, if you've been counting, I just listed 14 gods. So how does that work? There's basically 3 of them where there's an argument of whether or not they are actually an Olympian, and that was Hestia, Dionysus, and Hades, for very different reasons. Some say Hades isn't an Olympian because he doesn't live in Olympus, he chooses to live in the underworld. However, some people say that he is because he is a child of Kronos. There's a joke somewhere of Hades being the Pluto of Olympus and Pluto being the Roman name for Hades, but I digress. Hestia and Dionysus is a bit of a different situation. Basically, the whole explanation is that Hestia was an Olympian and basically gave up her place on Olympus to Dionysus for whatever reason. Anyway, that is basically just all the context you kind of really need to know to understand anything I'm about to go on in this video. Now I've got all that exposition done, I can finally get into the meat of this. Very quickly, the concept of a Greek hero arose in the ethos of Greek mythology. These Greek heroes tend to fall under a list of requirements, which I equate to the list of requirements needed for a character to be a Disney princess. These requirements seeming to be being a child of an Olympian, being sent on a quest, usually due to a prophecy, and getting a help from a god. Not necessarily the god whose child it is, though. because that's a whole other thing. This model is quite famously adopted by Rick Riordan in the Percy Jackson books. Some of these heroes include Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, and Achilles, most of them being illegitimate children of Zeus, which causes a whole deal of grief from Hera in return. Now, Heracles is the son of Zeus and Alcmene, who realizes very quickly that her son is probably not going to be very popular with Hera, so decides to name him after her, which doesn't really work. He ends up getting sent on 12 labours, which you probably remember from the movie Hercules if you watched that as a kid. And somewhere along the lines, he gets married, he has 2 children, and Hera causes him to go mad and kill them all. He is, in the end, granted immortality, but given what he has to live with, that might not be a good thing. Okay, with the story of Perseus, you're going to find history yet again repeating itself with people overthrowing their father and or grandfather who happens to be king. Basically, a king one day receives a prophecy that his grandson is going to one day overthrow him. So he decides to lock up his one and only daughter so that she cannot have a child, which I mean, fair enough. However, what this king does not understand is that Zeus will stop at nothing to have a child with a human, so he impregnates her through the form of rain. Literally rain. I don't even know how to interpret that for you. That is literally what it is stated as. Naturally, when the king finds out that he miraculously has a grandson all of a sudden, he locks them both in a chest and throws them out to sea, which is a choice to say for sure. I feel like there's more effective ways of achieving what he wants to achieve. Naturally, they survive, because it's just a stupid plan to get rid of your family, and wash up on an island where they have a fairly happy life. However, a few years go by, and Perseus isn't very happy of who he might be getting as a stepdad, so he decides to go off and kill Medusa, who was honestly just kind of minding her own business. And then from her severed head springs the very first Pegasus. On the way back, Perseus decides to just casually save a princess from a sea monster, gets married, and lives happily ever after. Oh, and at some point he accidentally murders his grandfather by throwing a javelin in a sports tournament. Completely unrelated to the rest of the story. Okay, so Theseus' story actually starts without Theseus. Basically, one day, yet another Grecian princess is impregnated by a god, but this time it was Poseidon, and also technically wasn't him. Basically, he decided that he was going to have a princess fall in love with a literal bull, like the animal, and have a baby with it because her husband would not sacrifice it to him. The gods are very petty, as you are going to find out very quickly. And so thus from that relationship, the Minotaur was born, who was pretty much immediately locked inside a massive labyrinth built by the inventor Daedalus because King Minos didn't want to deal with him. However, he realised, I kind of need to keep this thing alive, so I'm going to sacrifice a group of people every year to it. One year, this happens to include Theseus, the Prince of Athens, which I feel like might cause some political tension, sacrificing a foreign prince to a monster in the middle of a labyrinth, but clearly King Minos doesn't really consider that point. However, before he is sacrificed to the Minotaur, he falls in love with the Princess Ariadne, who gives him a spool of thread so that he can find his way out of the labyrinth and thus defeat the Minotaur. Which, of course he does. He defeats the Minotaur, he gets out of the labyrinth, he marries Ariadne, happily ever after. Weirdly, a lot of the Greek hero stories are bittersweet. This one is not, and it's quite odd. Now, Achilles was most known to be a soldier during the Trojan War, although he was also kind of known to be the living embodiment of the Titanic, supposedly unbeatable except for one spot on his heel, hence the Achilles heel, because he was dipped in the river Styx as a child, and, they have to hold him from some point. However, what Achilles is also kind of most known for is his chaotic love life during the Trojan War. First of all, before the war even starts, he ends up getting roped into an arranged marriage, which is actually just a cover to sacrifice his fiancée so that they could have good luck during the war, arranged by his future not father-in-law, which is basically the entire plot of, not the Oresteia, a Greek play I cannot think of the name of the top of my head. I will put it on screen. He then, in the middle of the war, just randomly decides that he doesn't want to fight anymore because he falls out with Agamemnon over a woman, and then later on down the line is driven back into the war because his totally platonic, not at all romantic affiliated at all, best friend gets killed. While the gods in Greek mythology were mostly used to keep the people of Greece in check, being a pantheon around to be worshipped and feared, the Greek heroes were more in place to be role models for the people of Greece, with most of the myths surrounding the Greek heroes being fables. Which is why they're probably mostly said to be demigods. They're not quite human, but they're still mortal, as if their actions have been blessed by the gods themselves. On the flip side of things, while Greek gods were known to bless heroes, they were also the cause of a lot of problems that ancient Greece faced. As I had just mentioned, Poseidon created the Minotaur, even if it was to punish the king of Minos. He still ended up murdering many people because of it. At some point in the near future, I'll make another video going into this in a bit more detail, because Medusa's story is very complicated in terms of people's discrepancies on how she is portrayed and certain details within the myth. However, the generally agreed upon mythos surrounding Medusa is that she was a devout patron of Athena, who, let's say, attracted a liking from Poseidon, and in turn Athena turned her into what we know of today as a woman with snakes for hair who could turn people into stone. As I just mentioned a minute ago, there are some discrepancies in interpretation of the myth surrounding Athena's intentions of turning Medusa into what she was. Some people say it was a punishment for having relations with Poseidon. Some say it is a gift of defense to keep men away from her, because it is also debated on whether or not that was consensual. However, one of the instances where Athena was definitely punishing a human for something was the myth surrounding Arachne. Arachne was quite a gifted weaver, and it was to the point where she would go around telling people that she was better than Athena, which, side note, if there's one thing that you want to take away from literally any Greek myth, is that you do not disrespect a god in any aspect. I'm pretty sure Psyche, Arachne, and Bellerophon can tell you that firsthand. It's basically a one-way ticket to ruining your life. So Athena, of course, heard that Arachne had been going around dissing her, so she came down to Earth and challenged Arachne to a tapestry-making battle, apparently. And while Athena wove a tapestry depicting her winning the patronage of the capital of Greece over Poseidon, Arachne decided to produce a tapestry just describing all of Poseidon and Zeus's fuckboy behaviour, which, keep in mind, is Athena's father and uncle. So Athena decided to turn her into a spider, regardless of whether or not she was actually the better weaver. Much like with Greek heroes, Greek monsters and the myths surrounding them were around to keep the people of Greece in check, although while Greek heroes were around to be role models for the people of Greece, a lot of the origins surrounding Greek monsters were more cautionary tales. Like, for example, the origins of the Minotaur. The Minotaur was created by Poseidon due to a lack of respect from the king of Minos. So basically it is telling people, respect the gods, or we'll just make a killing machine and send it down there. While Medusa's, again, the interpretation of Medusa's story varies a lot within certain adaptations of it. It could have been a repercussion for disrespecting a temple of Athena, or it could just be a cautionary tale of do not trust men. It really could depend. Love in Greek mythology is a very large topic to talk about. The Greeks had a very multi-dimensional view when it comes to talk about love, and had even different words for different types of love and even different types of relationships. You may have heard the phrase, "It's okay to be gay in ancient Greece as long as you weren't a bottom." There's a reason why that exists. There was agape, which was an unconditional love for other humans. There was philia, who was platonic love for one's friends. Storge, which is a love for family members, and then there was eros, which is romantic and passionate love that we more traditionally think of, which is not to be confused with the god Eros, which was most likely named after the concept Eros. This is going to get confusing very fast, I apologise. Even the Greek gods of love and beauty aren't one-dimensional. Aphrodite has two different birth origins, and depending on where you lived in Greece, she didn't even just represent love and beauty. In Sparta, she was worshipped as a goddess of war, although in Sparta, that could have been one and the same. Eros is just the same as well. He also has two different birth origins, and depending on certain myths, he could have been a deity predating the Olympians themselves, or he could be the son of Aphrodite. No one really knows. Apollo was known to have a very, let's say, unfortunate love life, with most of his lovers either dying or turning into plant life. To the point where the list is so long, I am actually going to have to read it out of my notes because I'm going to forget a couple. There was Daphne, who turned into a laurel tree. Castaly turned into a puddle for some weird reasons. Cassandra was cursed and honestly might have been the most unfortunate out of these. Acantha turned into a cactus, again keeping with the plant life theme. And then Belina, Legates, and Okro all flung themselves into the ocean or off cliffs to escape Apollo, which describes my average experience on Tinder. Notably, there was also Hyacinthus, who ended up becoming a victor of Zephyr, the OG yandere of Olympus. Eros also has his own love story, although that one happens to have a much happier outcome than most of Apollo's, which was about a princess called Psyche, who was known to be particularly beautiful. One day receives a prophecy that she is going to marry a beast. She later gets kidnapped by said beast, who is invisible, and she is told that she can never lay eyes on him. They get along quite well, actually, have a pretty normal life, until she gets visited by her two sisters, who don't really like that she's having quite a lavish life, and then get into her head a little bit, and that night she snuck into Eris's room while he was sleeping, and turned out, the beast she married just happened to be the god of love and is actually really handsome. However, Eris catches her because some oil from her lamp fell on him and burnt him, and he goes off to Olympus to sulk a bit because he asked his wife to do one thing and she didn't do it. So in turn, Aphrodite, being royally pissed off, A, that there's someone that might be more beautiful than her, and B, upset her son, sends Psyche on a series of tasks she must complete to redeem herself, including stealing Persephone's beauty from the underworld, which she does. In turn, Eros forgave her actually long before these tasks were set. It's just Aphrodite can be particularly petty about certain things sometimes. And she is granted immortality, and they live together on Olympus happily ever after. Now, if we're talking about outside the gods, there's actually a myth that's recently gained popularity, that being the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, which has re-entered the public consciousness through the musical Hadestown, which, sidebar really quickly, I went to go and see Hadestown last month in Broadway, and it was so good. Jordan Fisher was playing Orpheus. It was amazing. Orpheus is actually a demigod, being the son of a muse, which are the goddesses of various creative disciplines, although that's not really relevant to the story. For reasons that change between retellings, Orpheus's wife, Eurydice, dies and is taken to the underworld, as one naturally does when they die. Heartbroken Orpheus decides that, you know what, he's not just going to go through the normal grief cycle, he's going to march down to the underworld to get his wife back. And after some bartering and possibly a brief musical sequence, Hades concedes and he will let Eurydice go, with the one stipulation that they have to walk out with one in front of the other, and Orpheus cannot look behind to check that Eurydice is following him. Now, this is the point of contention for most people when it comes to the myth, because, spoiler alert, Orpheus does end up looking back, and Eurydice is taken back to the underworld to never return. Some people argue that in some versions of the myth, Eurydice doesn't know that Orpheus can't look back to her, so she is begging him to look at her, which is honestly so sad. Because if you see, like, again, if you see Hadestown, because I can't stop raving about this musical, seriously, it's sad enough just watching them go through it, and that's not even part of the Hadestown. So that, yeah, sad. It's Greek tragedies. I don't know why I thought anything less. Some people think it's a stupid decision that Orpheus turned back. However, some argue that it's human nature to look back, and that to love is to look back is a quote that I've seen a lot around TikTok recently. Now, there are a number of myths surrounding the underworld, mostly involving Hades and Persephone just minding their own business until someone comes in and wreaks havoc, which is honestly classic middle child syndrome from Hades, just not wanting to get involved with his siblings' chaos. Hades and Persephone have their own love story, which I say with hesitation because depending on your interpretation, the myth gives off very different messages. The general constants of the myth is that Persephone is a child of Demeter and is picking flowers one day, and Hades is watching her from afar and falls in love with her. So he does the classic, healthy and normal thing for any man to do when he's in love with a woman, and kidnaps her. Now, it does depend on the interpretation of whether or not Persephone loves him back. In some versions she does, in others she's kind of just indifferent to it all. She decides that in the terms of Olympians, Hades isn't the worst husband she could have, so she's like, okay, and kind of just deals with it. However, Demeter is a helicopter parent, so she demands the return of her daughter despite the slight Stockholm syndrome she may now have, which causes a bit of a slight war between the two gods, which results in a pact of basically Persephone is going to spend 6 months of the year in the underworld, 6 months in the year in the overworld, basically just a joint custody agreement, but one of them is her husband, which is meant to be the myth surrounding the seasonal cycle. So when Persephone is up in Olympus or on Earth, it's spring/summer, and then when she goes down to the underworld, winter starts. Of course, I've already mentioned a couple of myths surrounding the underworld so far in this video, for example, Orpheus and Eurydice, a tiny bit of Eros and Psyche. However, there's only a couple others really that really surround the underworld, and one of them I find quite entertaining because I've already covered this person in question in this video, and you're gonna get a vastly different characterization, let's just say, of this person. So you guys remember Theseus, right? The guy that I covered a minute ago during the Greek heroes section, you know, saved a bunch of people from the Minotaur and stuff like that, married the princess, whatever. What people tend to forget is what he did before he went into the labyrinth. Okay, so Theseus is the Prince of Athens, right? He also has a brother called Puriphus, who not many people hear of because he's only really relevant in this myth and really nothing else. So Theseus and Puriphus, they're your classic frat bros of Greek mythology, and they decide, we're too good for normal Greek women, we deserve to marry a daughter of Zeus. So Theseus chooses Helen of Troy, that Helen of Troy, and kidnaps her. Keep in mind, Helen of Troy was 12 years old at the time, and he's like, oh, well, I don't really want to marry a 12-year-old. So he kidnaps Helen of Troy and just decides to keep her and waits until they're at a better age to get married. Like I said, vastly different interpretation of Theseus in this myth. Puriphus, however, despite having absolutely no relevance, even including modern-day myth interpretation, decides he wants to marry Persephone. The only problem is, Persephone's already queen of the underworld at this point. Now, despite pretty much it being a very obviously terrible idea to kidnap the queen of the underworld and also wife of Hades. Theseus is like, no, let's do it, bro. Let's go down there and kidnap Persephone. So they do, being met with a very livid Hades when they come down here. So Hades does the naturally expected reaction when two guys show up to kidnap your wife. He invites them to dinner. However, obviously, this isn't actually what happened. They go to dinner together, and then snakes erupt from their chairs and basically keep them there, and Hades sticks the furies of them for the night. So, after potentially years of suffering, we actually don't know how long they were down in the underworld for. Helen of Troy gets rescued, by the way. She's fine. Well, until, the start of the Trojan War, but for the most part, she's fine. And then after however much time goes by, Heracles shows up in the underworld, decides to free Theseus, and he goes to free Eurystheus, and Hades is like, nah, son. Theseus, sure, he can go, but this guy tried to steal my wife, he's staying. And Heracles gets so scared, he just leaves Eurystheus. Now, I don't know how many people have heard Sisyphus, but I feel like, generally speaking, a lot of people have heard the name Sisyphus, don't really know who he is. There's actually, me and my friend are a big fan of this improv comedy group called Shoot from the Hip, and there's a very kind of infamous clip of theirs of them debating on whether or not Sisyphus is a character in Greek mythology or a philosopher. However, if you know slightly more than that, you'll know that Sisyphus is basically doomed to forever roll a massive boulder up a hill, and then when it reaches the top, it falls back down again, and he has to do that on cycle for eternity. But not many people actually know why he has to do that. Okay, so before, doomed to roll a boulder for eternity, Sisyphus was a king in Greece. However, he was also notably a terrible host, because whenever he would have dinner parties, he would kill all of the guests and steal their stuff, which, by the way, in ancient Greece, that is a big violation of laws of hospitality, which is big deal there. If anyone had to study Macbeth, actually, in English literature in high school, you'll know about the laws of hospitality. Big no-no. So the gods are, kind of pissed off at him about this, and he's like, we should probably kill him. And so Hades rings up Thanatos, god of death, by the way, basically like the Grim Reaper equivalent, let's say, in Greek mythology. It's a bit more than that. However, even Thanatos is like, I can do it, but just to let you know, Sisyphus might find a way to get out of this. He's quite smart with stuff like this. And Hades is like, it's fine, just do it. So Thanatos shows up at Sisyphus's castle, which, by the way, very hard to say, with some special chains, actually, gifted by Hades, because he's like, well, if this guy tries to get away, try and use this stuff, it'll bind his spirit. And obviously Sisyphus kind of notices the god of death just, casually at a dinner party one day. And so he does the logical thing and starts complimenting these chains that Thanatos got as a new gift. And the more I talk about this, I'm just picturing like a necklace, not actual chains. However, while Thanatos is explaining things, he gets a bit distracted. So instead of taking Sisyphus and killing him, Sisyphus kidnaps Thanatos and sticks him in a trunk. So with the god of death being kidnapped, he can't actually do his job, so for an entire month, nothing can die, which really pisses off Hades, because he likes a bit of death. So they start looking for Thanatos. However, the detectives didn't exist in Greece, so it takes them a long time. Eventually, however, they do find Thanatos, and Sisyphus, however, is smart. So before they found him, he goes to his wife and he's like, I'm probably going to die soon. If I do, don't do the proper funerary processions, just throw my body out onto the street. And his wife's very confused, but she's like, okay. And naturally, when they find Thanatos, they drag Sisyphus down into the underworld. Now, while he's down in the underworld, he basically just kind of guilt trips Persephone. He's like, Persephone, it's so bad. My wife just threw my body out onto the street, and Persephone takes pity on him and says that he can go back to life for 3 days to sort out his own funeral and haunt his wife. However, upon regaining life, he just refuses to go back to the underworld again, and Thanatos is too traumatized from the kidnapping to actually go and get him, so he lives a long life and dies of old age eventually. However, obviously, when he dies of old age, he goes back down to the underworld, and Hades is understandably pissed. So naturally, well, we know the rest of the story happens. They stick him on a hill, they give him a rock boulder, forced to roll the boulder up the hill, and then inevitably have it fall down for eternity. Now that's all I have, because honestly, if I add any more sections to this video, it is going to be hours long, and I'm not quite at the point for that long of a video essay yet. It took me 5 days to film this video alone. So I'm going to leave it here, but I really enjoyed this. I love talking about Greek mythology it's an alarming degree, honestly. I might do a part 2 to this, honestly, because there's so much more. But I can't. That's a video for another day. Thank you all for watching. I'm hopefully going to be posting weekly again. I don't think I've ever posted weekly, but theoretically I'm meant to. Yeah, hopefully there won't be another 6-month gap, but we will see.